to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Rucker.
Here.
Alderman Ross.
Here.
Alderman Rose. Alderman Rose.
Yeah, I'm here.
Alderman Hoffman.
Here.
Alderman Osteen.
Here.
Alderman Varela.
Here. All right, we have no unfinished business in business. Main license 2022. Over to the city administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. So I realize the packet is, had a lot of pages in it. A lot of the surveys had a lot of pages. In addition to that, Alderman Rucker asked about the individual comments in some of the survey questions. So for some additional paperwork in front of you, apologize for all the extra papers. I can definitely get this out to you electronically, if not all included in the summary, probably from a couple months ago. I don't pretend that I don't believe you're gonna get through all these pages, but some of these comments inside are more specific that you might wanna look over at a later time. So feel free to take it with you, or we'll get electronic copies later. But the bulk of the, citizen survey and the summary and some demographics is included in your package, which I think is probably most important. I've really broken down today into 3 sections that we've historically done. The first part we'll get to is really just the summary. So we kind of like, here's where you left off last year, here's what happened last year. I'll go through a little financial update. The mayor wants to discuss working with the city administrative staff. And then section 2, the future outlook. I know Alderman Ross had some insertions that he wanted put in, but I still broke down to internal economic growth, good governance, the different sections. So Alderman Ross, we go through it. This is your all's meeting, so however you want to section off with the topics, I try to envelope in Ross's information. So we'll start, and when we get to that section, Alderman Ross.
Well, I don't want those segmented. I want to present all those together.
Well, so I was just gonna say, if you want to go ahead and present your stuff right at the beginning, then we will just go through today. About noon, I do. Jan has organized the taco bar with all the things from Hy-Vee. So wherever we're at around noon, we'll stop right for lunch, and then if we get out before 4, or we need to go later than 4, or we've got stuff at 4 that we realize we need to do, we can do another meeting. So that's why I didn't really segregate time. Just gonna let the flow go the way the flow needs to go. If that makes sense. So that being said, really your first, right past the page 2, is really the summary from last year. There's about 3 pages of that. Not going to go through the whole thing, but I thought if you had time to read it, it's kind of refresh on the different sections last year where you ended up with your main bullet points on some objectives.
Page 2 on the bottom left.
Yes, I'm sorry. We've got so many different pages, but so the bottom left is the main packet page. Thank you, Mayor. So it's not too confusing, because as I insert things into Adobe, I do not take the original page numbers off. So really, that's just a summary. So if there's any questions or any conversation you want to have on that, I also try to do that. I thought it was important to, every year after these things, this is the kind of summary I do to discuss with staff. So moving on, if there's no really discussion on last year's summary, moving on to page 5, I did do a budget update. I will go through this kind of briefly and answer any questions that you have as we go through. Again, page 5, bottom left. The audit was recently completed, as the auditors presented last meeting. So with that being said, I take the audit and I reconcile beginning cash balances based on what actually happened in 2023. So when the budget is being processed, we are estimating the end of 2023 to develop a 24 budget. And to develop a 24 budget, the beginning cash balances are very important because that's what you're spending on. So as I reconcile the audit, General fund was, beginning balances were less than 1%, different than originally estimated, so there wasn't too much fluctuation on what actually happened in 23 based on what we estimated in 23. Revenues did come in slightly lower by the end of the year. Expenditures also come in lower. There are a few projects that were carried over. That's the case in a lot of these funds. You know, what we think we're going to get finished and what actually gets finished sometimes is different. So that affects your carryover balance. Capital improvement fund, beginning balances were approximately 11% less than originally estimated. This was mainly due to just revenues coming in a little less than estimated. With that being said, the adjusted net estimated unrestricted spending is about 1.4 billion, so a little different. If you jump to page 7, it's a summary of kind of what I'm saying, so you can get a highlight of the cash differences.
So Gina, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we can just lessen this.
This is the packet that came out with the agenda last, or
The
Monday.
agenda items I have to go to the files are just the first page.
Yeah, that's all I got.
That's what I have. The whole packet here? Yeah, I did it electronically. I just didn't get it the packet. I just kept getting the agenda page. So
Charts and the whole adjustments out. It looks like
there's
this.
a packet for the meeting or upcoming board meeting.
Just the agenda, the first page of it.
You want me to go make copies?
Well, you know, chart it. I did make one.
I'm not finding it.
Here, I have one. It should have been with the whole packet, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Here, you can have this one. There's two.
Thank you.
You got it?
This-
All packets? Yeah.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, that's it.
Here's the whole packet right here.
Yeah. He's got it. Phyllis, if you want-
Electronic, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you need one?
Mine's a little bit.
Page 9,
Yeah.
you're looking at?
This is hard copy. It's got page 7 on the left, page 9 on the right.
Yeah, okay, got it. Okay.
Okay, let me make sure.
So
All
where
right.
are you at again? I'm
So
sorry.
page 5, bottom left. Bottom left is the whole packet page number.
Okay.
Page 5, bottom left is where my just budget update report starts. Page 7 is really a reconciled summary of the fund balances and the changes, so that might be at a glance easier to. Yeah, transportation, actually ended up with more cash beginning balances. However, that was mainly due, revenues did come in slightly lower, but expenditures also come in lower. Keep in mind, there were projects that probably didn't get done. So beginning balance would look good, but if we carried over projects, the ending dollars, may not be the exact same increase. Water and sewer fund, both did have beginning balances come in 18%, 17% respectively. However, again, expenditures were down, some of which were projects that were completed that were carried over. Sewer, you want to make a special note of sewer. As you recall in our budget, sewer had a significant amount of transfers from CIT and the water fund for 24 to balance with projects. Because we had some increases in beginning balances from the audit, we do have some projects to date the board has not approved. And that equals about 1.25 million. So even though on your sewer, that it looks like we're negative on unrestricted funds, that's assuming the budget, that everything gets done in the budget. But if that $1.25 million in projects do not carry forward, then some of the transfers from CIT and or water can be decreased as well. So sewer can still be in the black because there are some projects. If you remember, there was generator, there was something on Elbow K, a couple of things that just haven't passed to this point. And so if you take in consideration with that, by the end of the year, it should be considered that transfers should be decreased. Sewer was borrowing from water, about 650,000, I think, from, water. So obviously they've got to pay water back. So either you do that this year and then transfer some CIT. So that'd be something to be determined later, but as you see the negative in sewer, that's still.
The transfer hasn't occurred yet, though.
Well,
Did it occur?
Sure.
They're coming, they're broken monthly.
Carrie does them as they go, so as we estimate the end of the year, or kind of justify, she can slow down for returns. Yeah. It's not like a one-time transfer, she does those kind of as,
Yeah.
just to keep the cash flow.
Okay.
But they can be ceased or they can be reversed.
So when we have projects that carry over, don't they go into restricted funds at that point? The budget for them?
We do not utilize, that system.
Okay,
It's carried over into the budget. Like if we know that it's gonna be carried over, then it just puts in the new expenditure. I'm not saying there's not, we don't self-restrict.
right.
We don't use a true appropriation, so it's not gonna show up like that in the budget.
So the project last year, in 2023, didn't get done. Then it's a project again in the capital piece, and it's also part of the 2024 expenditures.
So,
And the reserves that are projected or shown there do not include those. That's,
so,
okay, no problem. I'm just trying to keep it straight.
well, I know, it is confusing. So when we're estimating the 24 budget, and we're estimating 23 year end, if we know for a fact that the project's not gonna get done, we will go ahead and put it in the 2024 budget. And so when you look at my project details, I'll put carry. You know it came from. But sometimes what happens is what we think we're gonna finish truly then doesn't get finished. We have budgeted in 23 to finish, but we come 24 and realize, okay, airport is a good example with those grant projects. We didn't get as much done on a project, or we didn't. So when I reconcile beginning balances, it's gonna look like, oh, we have an extra, whatever extra cash. Well, we know that those are carryovers that most of the time those are budget amendments later on.
Say it's supposed to be a budget on following that.
Right, once we know what we spent.
So to expand on that a little bit, because I always struggle with this one, I apologize. Restricted other and sewer, $2.5 million. What would that, what are the kind of things that is?
So restricted other and sewer are, our funds are restricted outside our policy guidelines, but they're legal or other self-restricted money. So sewer still have, because of bonds, there's still some restricted required. So
Because of the bonds.
bonds and some other, I have to get my
Be
details.
self-restricted, I'm not sure what that means.
Well, self-restricted is just things that we know we're gonna do, and in fact, I don't even think sewer has anything we purposely self-restricted. But other would be anything outside, excuse me, fund our reserve policy. But most of the time, those are more legal requirements.
Gina, while we're on that subject, discussion type of thing, why is it there is, no restricted funds in transportation? Because I thought we had restricted money that we put towards. Did we
That
spend
is-
all that?
That's fund reserves. That's within the fund reserves.
Oh, that's in the
Transportation doesn't
reserve.
have any additional legal restrictions.
No, I know there's no legal restriction, but we self-restricted money on, when we took over the park many years ago.
And we call that the capital improvement plan, or the capital, like the depreciation replacement, and that's included in this restricted fund reserves. 3 point something.
But 3.1 for the end of the year projected,
Yes,
that's included in there. That's not just our reserve requirement,
it's both,
it's both.
because actually it's the same. If the reserve policy was written, that includes one piece that's cash restricted for operating, and the other piece is for capital replacement, or what we call depreciation replacement. That money that we make sure that we have money when the parkway needs overlaid or whatever, that's part of that depreciation replacement. We combined it that years ago to be part of the depreciation replacement. So certain vehicles, certain equipment, pavement maintenance, those kind of things are. Ambulance was nearly the same. I mean, just a few $100s. I'm not concerned about that. They, basically what was estimated For 23, both incoming and outgoing was nearly the same. Lacey Fine and Grand Glaze both had a little increase in beginning cash balances, but again, that is directly tied to pieces of projects that we ended up not getting done in 23. So they will be done in 24. So
Why is Lacey Fine's revenue projection, not projection, actual, just walk so far down?
well, the Lacey Fine's big sales are fuel sales, and we're just not hitting the peak. So July and August are still very big, and January, February, March is the lowest. So we feel half the year will catch up, could very well catch up to be where it's supposed to be by the end of the year, just because of the way fuel sales are. I mean, you've got hair rental and stuff that's pretty consistent, but fuel sales is the big, millions of dollars, lots of fuel sales. Any questions on the financial update?
I don't know if this is a place to talk about this or not, but there's a better spot on the agenda. Please tell me, reserve.
Reserve policy?
Yes.
Well, under good governance, I do have financial goals and objectives.
Okay.
That's up to you guys.
Where are you on, please?
Under 2D, I have a little two, financial goals and objectives.
Okay.
Any other questions on that?
Yep. We were working at somebody in the Melton speak, what was his name?
Joe Walker.
Logger. Basically, he was going to talk a little bit about the relationship between the board and staff. And I know, talked with Gina, the staff. Or 105, we basically said in layman's terms that the board should not go directly to a staff member. They should go through the city administrator. And so the city administrator said, yeah, go ahead and talk to that. And I know she said years ago, and mine was absolutely do not talk to the staff. And John was more, hey, go help yourself. I think we need to finalize, kind of come to an agreement on what we should and should not do. And what we're trying to avoid is anybody pulling into public works or office, whatever, and just, hey, I got a problem with this, what can you do? So since ordinance is written, and if you just like a couple of sentences.
It's included in your packet.
And so I think we need to determine as a board how that should be handled, especially that coming into. We need to say, hey, if you have a legitimate complaint or right questions or whatever, should you go through the city administrator first before then as the ordinance states, or should it be more lax? If it should be more lax. I think we need to talk about that and determine as a board what we should do.
Where's that ordinance at?
It's page 8 in your packet on the left side.
It's 115, 190. It's very short. No member of the Board of Aldermen shall directly interfere with the conduct of any department or duties of employees subordinate to the city administrator, except the express direction of the Board of Aldermen with the approval of the city administrator. One sentence.
I think that.
Interfere with, is that how that's written? It says interfere with the conduct of duties.
Yes, sir.
I think that there is needs to be some understanding of what it says. Because you can take it to the staff, one thing you can take it then, okay, I want to talk to Mike Weldy. I've got to say, Gina, I want to talk to Mike. What about, here's my agenda. Here's what I'm talking about. Okay, go ahead. That's one of the things. Can't even talk. The other thing is I read it, is I'll take an example of what I've got going on right now. I've got an email off to Todd. I'll wait for Todd to respond back, asking for a meeting with him and the ambulance supervisor to discuss some ambulance numbers, wanting to bring forth. I want to look at, do we need more staffing on the ambulance, et cetera, all that. I don't think that needs to go through the city administrator, because I'm not going to him when I read this and directing him. I'm not going to tell him, you need to do this. I'm not going to tell him, you need to understaff. I'm not going to tell him, you need to fire this person. I'm not going to tell him that you need to change. I'm researching. Okay? That's what I read this as. I'm going to him and getting information. Now, once I get my information and gather it all together, and I think that we should add additional staff to the ambulance and we should staff up the second and blah, 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 blah. That doesn't go to Todd unless I want to ask him, what would it cost to do that? I'm still not directing him to do that. I then come to the board if I need to do that. I say, hey, I want to do this. Now, that's where I see things, sometimes during those conversations that I've had with different staff, and those situations going on with Ron White, where we're delving into a situation with inspections. I happen to have the furnace got put in and hasn't been inspected by the city. So we're working through that and figuring out how, what, and where we can fix the problem. I'm not directing him. So that's where I undertake this. Is that you're not supposed to be going there and directing those staff members. I don't think that it inhibits us from asking questions. And we all have to be very careful when we have that conversation with the staff. That's what I interpret.
My opinion. It's all based on interpretation. Kevin, you're saying this is how I interpret it. Well, let's dial it down on the verbiage so that there is no interpretation. It is black and white. It's based on the context and the reason you're approaching that staff member. If it's for feedback, if it's for opinion, obviously that is acceptable because you're not giving them directives. You're not basically undermining the role of the city administrator. So I think maybe just add a little more verbiage will basically clarify that there is no interpretation, because as we know, that gets us in a lot of trouble because people have different interpretations of how things state. So really, it's on the context of the conversation.
I think Alderman Rucker is interpreting it correctly, and I don't think this prohibits questions or anything like that. And I think from staff's point of view, we would rather have questions. If you got questions on an agenda item, we'd rather hear them rather than just have to, do it all from the dais. If you have a simple question about the operations of the department, my department's obviously a little weird, but I mean, the other thing is this is a 1985 ordinance, so it's coming up on 40 years old. But we could certainly spell that out in greater detail than what we have now. But yeah, I think that's a fair, I think it's the right reading of the ordinance. But where the line is between questions and direction, and it doesn't actually say, it says directly interfere with the conduct or duties. So, I think we could, if you have more direction from me of what you would like it to say more clearly, I'd be happy to have those comments put together a more thoughtful version of this.
I agree with Alderman. Everything he says sounds perfect to me.
I mean, if I go in and say, Zach, fire this person.
Yep.
I have no authority to do that. I, as a single board member, I don't have the authority at all to say that. I don't have the authority even to say it. I can come to this meeting as a group and say, I want to fire this guy. Okay? And that can be something that the board can decide. But I don't have that. That's totally not acceptable.
Yeah, so let's put that in writing.
So the one of the scenarios you outlined earlier, I think it's the good kind of, we get to the fuzzy line in between. So using your example, talking to Todd, I want this information, I want that information, I want this, great. The one that kind of makes me go, is, and I need direction from the board where you want this one to fall, is, Todd, I want to know how much it would cost to A, B, and C. Well, if that requires devoting department resources to putting something out to bid, or, it's going to take Zach, 8 hours of manpower to get bids and price.
Sorry, that's directing. So I'm going to.
Yes.
In 2 weeks. This is where I've seen struggles, and you're right. was city administrator, Dad has worked this differently, every mayor is administrator. Past city administrator, she was very adamant. She told her department, we're talking about subordinate to the, you put the city administrator in charge first. So the appointed officials, there's a little different leeway there. Now, the one example I'm gonna give you should apply equally, but we're talking about, hired individuals and it has concerns for staff because I don't know how many conversations over the last 10 years I've had with staff and it's like, hey, Alderman so-and-so wants me to do this. Alderman so-and-so's like, you don't work there. Aldermen go on the dais and vote on something, then we put that forward. But they get pulled between who do I listen to? Who do I listen to? And Cole's right, that happens a lot. It's like the Board of Aldermen and mayor have the right to ask questions to get information. But there's a fine line when that turns to, I think you should be doing this, or will you get me this? Okay, if it's easy, one and done, send me an email. But then it's like, okay, you have a single alderman asking me to change priorities. It's like, okay, that's when I'm like, you come to me, I'm your liaison between the elected body. And let's say that example, it's like, okay, Ty, how long will it take you? What do you need from me? Let's bring the board in. Maybe they want some more information because, is it going to take hours? Is it going to take days? How big a project it is? There has to be some subjectivity in there. You can write a 5-page rule on it, but there's always going to be something that's going to be some subjectivity. Where it crosses the line is questions being asked then turn into sounding like directives. Mm-hmm. And you've got staff that, and this is, I call it star. It's like, oh, Alderman's calling, I need to do right now what they want to do. And I keep in mind, they have the right to information. But I need to be in the loop on your day-to-day and what you're doing, because then at the end of the day, I help you with your priorities. How do we make it a win-win? But you got one alderman over here and one alderman. Aldermen speak as a whole with on the dais. So it is a great line, and the staff sometimes it is confusing because I've had lots of conversations. So I think it's crossed the line. It puts everybody kind of in a position, but I know with this new change, like I said, I've really laid back on, again, the last city administrator, she's very active. Department's like, no, when it comes to you, I want to know that time. I want to know what's going on. I want to know what they're talking about so I can help manage that day to day. I don't, we don't. You can write as much you want into it, but I think it's what's saying is interfering and interrupting with the day-to-day operations. Information can lead to that.
And this is something that we've been doing the last several months, is cleaning stuff up. Almost a 40-year ordinance, and I want a workable staff, alderman and mayor group, and there's trying to eliminate many of those lines that can be misconstrued different ways.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would just say that I agree with Kevin's comments. I think that I've heard things about questions and so forth. I think that maybe where the line gets a little blurred is when there's suggestions. Okay. Suggestions versus direction. I know that many times I've talked with Gene about things, how we should, not necessarily we should do differently, but could we do this way? And then I've taken that step and just said, what are your thoughts? We'll get into it a little bit into the hiring process, different things. And I don't know if staff, this is where we need feedback possibly, that if those suggestions are seen as directions, okay, then, then I believe in this particular situation that we should take what I call exception-based management approach. If somebody steps out, okay, then somebody needs to be talked to. Okay? If I step over a line somewhere, every time I talk, if I ask for information, well, how long would it take you? Is it, you have time? Usually it's at least a week, 2 to 3 days, if not a week. And if it's too much, I ask, because I don't know what the is. Right? There's suggestions out there, and I say, hey, I'm just one guy here. I'm not trying to give you direction, but have you thought of this? And if that's out of line, then okay, we can talk about that. But I think that at this point, I don't know that we see, I don't see a need to change the ordinance. But I do see that we need to work together as a team, and if somebody feels like somebody's, in violation of this ordinance, for lack of a better term, then it needs to be brought to that person.
I think that point that Richard brought up is where the problem exists. And that is when it's felt that it's a suggestion, and I've had this conversation with different staffers and different things I've had, and it's like, well, okay, I guess, here's some thoughts on what way you could solve it, or here's some thoughts that I have. Those are some thoughts. Do I say those are suggestions? I don't know if I use that word, but they probably, depending on the staff, this staff over here is going to say, oh, well, Alderman Rucker gave me some suggestions. This staff over here is going to say, oh, I was just told to go do this. And I said the exact same thing. So it's not only what we say, it's also how it's interpreted by the staffers, and everybody's going to interpret it different. And that's where I think we've got to be we just have to be careful. And I would say that not only does the conversation need to be happening here, but look at both of you. You need to have a conversation with your staff and continue with that.
Especially new management.
So that when they feel like they're being told to do something, then, it's going to put their onus on your back to come to me and say, Mike thinks you told him to do this. No, I didn't. I suggested. Okay, I got to remember where I got to be a little more clear, when I say that or whatever.
I will say, because I've worked with the majority of the management team a long time, I have a few new members, they are very good at keeping me in the loop, and that's mainly the one thing I ask. Don't surprise me with something that's coming up from an alderman. I don't think it's always your guys' job just to make sure you tell me, but the staff, they're very, very good. It's like, I'm just keeping up in the loop. Like, that way I know when to help, I'm prepared for it, because I also know what other departments are doing. So if you go off and work on X, then I know maybe there's another department already working on that, so I will say that it is an ongoing learning experience. We do have some new management, and that can kind of learn it as they go. But the ones I've worked with a lot are very, very good about that, and that helps me, at least in that point. But I think it is.
One thought, one question. Just first of all, I want to point out that this does only apply to employees subordinate to the city administrator. So that doesn't apply to me. It doesn't apply to me. It's actually in the city administrator. So it only applies to employees subordinate to the city administrator.
That's what I said earlier. This is not, I'm not necessarily talking about appointed officials.
And to take that wrinkle further, that technically means that like the building inspectors are not covered by this. So, it's in the city administrator section. And so, if nothing else, perhaps we should be spelling out like Keegan's not covered because she works for Carrie, not for Gina. So, any of your gals are not covered because they work for you, not for Gina. So this applies to Mike, it applies to HR.
Yeah, but over in the HR, your city administrator is your personnel manager and can supersede any subordinate department manager. So it's basically everybody that's not.
I would probably propose at least spelling that that it doesn't apply to me, that it applies to all employees, whether we're talking about appointed officials or not. Other than appointed officials, I think there is a legal distinction between the appointed officials and not, because we are, I think I work for the mayor and the board under the general supervision of the city administrator, and that's how all of us are.
Which I would recommend the board.
That's enough.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we finish this conversation.
I was like,
Okay.
if we want to talk about cleanup, we can go through, because this is not the only subjective, could be interfered, because what's general supervision? Well, one day it may be one thing.
I would probably suggest pulling this out of the city administrator section and making it an all hands rule, so that it applies to everybody who's not an appointed official, because that would add some clarity to that. I think that's really cool. Understand it, but it's not. I don't think that's actually how it reads. And the other part I was going to say is the idea that we're going back to using the ambulance example. I think anytime we're talking about an alderman, anybody basically committing city resources to something, I think that is definitely so. So to Gina's point,
But not just a board vote. You need, again, we're not going to solve this today, but chapter 125 already has all this laid out. So how does this loop into what is already laid out?
If we need Cochran to go revisit a plan, and we're committing Cochran to billing us another whatever they bill us for to look at a plan, I think that's above the authority. That we're out of questions and we're into
Maybe or not. What,
well, yes,
you have that happens every day, but it's within this bucket. So,
Yeah, but to me, I think it's certainly, if we're talking about like committing city resources to something, that's definitely interfering with the conduct or duties of employees. So that would be my thought.
Can I go ahead?
John, he's here. I just want to say, we have nothing to lose by updating verbiage on this. If only for the fact that this is 40-year-old ordinance. So at least we as a board have effectively reviewed it and have tried to update our policies. End of the day, even if we change a single word, we have nothing to lose. That's all.
I don't have any problem with it. If we want to change it, that's okay too. But this committing city resources, so there's been times when I've talked, looking for this kind of data. How busy are you? Would it take, can you get it to me in 3 to 5 days? Well, technically that's committing city resources. Is that something that should be calling here and asking for?
That's what I'm asking for you guys to stop. Like where do you feel that line is? Where is the board comfortable? Because again, I mean, so we all agree that one email is fine.
okay, but
We
for that
agree that-
example though, Carrie, trying to, let's say the city planner.
No, I'm sorry. Sure.
Okay, well, let's say, okay,
It's
so
financial
either
data.
way, either
It's
example works. Okay, there's gotta be some subjectivity. She's the department head, she's the appointed official, she's gonna know, is this gonna be a big effect on my department? Or is this something that then I need to rearrange my priorities? So, again, you can write it, however, but it's gonna mean different,
I think resources, I don't have a problem with resources, I have a problem with money.
Yes, I mean, I agree that there's a distinction between staff time and dollars. Paying
Yeah,
she's
paying a
gonna know
consultant
what
to study something versus, hey, can your department handle this? I mean, I think that's, can somebody go out and look at this, and can Ron and Josh out to go look at something versus we need to bulldoze this house,
Or talking about
and
$300 an hour.
yeah, exactly.
Some of that is daily operations, which is still under
Mhm.
city administrator.
So if this were to be updated, does anyone have suggestions how it should be updated? Because I'm not seeing the update. It's something they're missing.
Well, that's nice, public meeting with your one.
We had it closed to people talking, and then we get here.
Okay, I don't know how to
can you unlock it?